It's day 421. It's also June 30th, 2020, and we're in the Ashley National Forest in Utah.
You ever wake up in the morning and ask yourself, what am I doing? And more importantly, why? Yeah, me too. Hi, my name's Craig, and this is my story. A story about life out there. For visuals while listening, search Life Out There on your favorite social media platform or use the links in the podcast description.
So, admittedly, social distancing on the western slope of Colorado, well, it really doesn't get much better than that, considering what others are dealing with out there. And as things continue to dial up on the COVID-19 front,
200,000 Americans dead from COVID-19. Each a life, each a tragedy. But how do you even begin to wrap your head around a number like that? It's an enormous cost that we can only try to put into perspective. So
it probably would have made good sense just to stay put, for a while longer anyway. The world seems to still be trying to figure this thing out. And people keep dying. Masks are a thing now. Everybody's supposed to wear a mask. Testing continues to ramp and become more accessible. And now the talk is around our medical facilities becoming overwhelmed and a shortage of ventilators nationwide. And how far out is a vaccine? And through it all, we're fortunate enough to be watching it all. To be watching all the nuttiness, tragedy even, from afar. From Rangeley. And Rangeley seems to handle things in a Rangeley sort of way, I guess. Nobody demands that you wear a mask. Nobody gives you a second look if you don't. Folks are being careful. Careful about protecting their little slice of the western slope. I know for sure treks into Meeker, Vernal, or Grand Junction are done with care. And as of when we left, hadn't heard of a single reported case or fatality in the town. So like I said, would have made good sense to stay put a bit longer. But we couldn't. Rangeley had been our hideaway for 3 months. That place where every sunrise screams adventure. And it was awesome, no doubt. But that itch was back. The kind that makes your feet restless and your mind, well, it just needs more. More of the unknown. I think they call it road fever, an inexplicable craving for change. A deep need to see that horizon through a windshield, and not knowing what's beyond it. And we'd figured out where we were headed next. There's a super cool place up there, where the northwest corner of Colorado meets the northeast corner of Utah, and Wyoming drops in here and there. A place where the air, it literally tastes like freedom. Where the landscape transforms with every passing mile. A place where the sky seems bigger. And the silence? Well, that's an experience all its own. And the thought of having all that wilderness to ourselves? Well, that's just quite literally the definition of awesome. And it's an area that we've actually driven by a couple of times now. But we never took that turn. We never jumped in with both feet. I remembered our first drive through the area last spring. We'd come down through the Flaming Gorge recreation area and spent the night in Vernal. And as I studied the map that night in Vernal, I'd realized everything we had just passed by. And I promised myself we'd come back. So we did. We'd head back to Vernal, and the toughest part at that point was picking a direction. Ultimately, we chose to head north, just 20 miles or so, into the Ashley National Forest. The climb and elevation helps to transition from that intense heat of Vernal's high desert climate. We're barely out of June, and the temps are already messing about with 100 degrees. Moving both north and up took us pretty quickly into a greener, a cooler universe, offering us the perfect spot to hang out for a couple of days. I mean, with over 1.4 million acres of national forest at our disposal, I'd say we're doing our part when it comes to social distancing. And I hadn't even realized that as we drove through the Flaming Gorge Recreation Area last spring, that we were actually in Ashley National Forest. This forest spans across both Utah and Wyoming, and it includes the gorge. The forest also includes an area referred to as the High Uintas Wilderness Area, one of the largest wilderness areas in the country. It's also home to the highest mountain range in Utah, the Uinta Range, which includes Kings Peak at over 13,500 feet tall. And sitting here in the foothills of all that wilderness, I read that the area is also known for its backcountry hiking opportunities. And while that did sound pretty amazing, I don't think any of the three of us are up for the challenges associated with backcountry hiking. Seclusion is, pretty awesome most of the time. But for us, for right now anyways, we prefer our seclusion includes cell coverage, a bed, and a refrigerator. So we drove just far enough in and found our spot. We did need to pop that cell signal booster up. Not exactly going to do any movie streaming while we're here, but we can at least do a bit of web surfing and stay caught up on emails. And we'll also have to stay on our toes during those long walks. The internet tells us the list is long when it comes to critters that call this place home full time. Moose, black bears, mountain lion, deer, elk, raccoons, beavers, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, porcupines, rattlesnakes, and pika? I never heard of a pika. The internet tells me it's some sort of rabbit-like mountain dweller. It looks like a rabbit without the ears to me. Maybe even a big rat. But of course all these guys hang out here. The area is known for having incredibly diverse ecosystems. One of the more distinct characteristics of this national forest is that the Uinta mountain range runs east to west, unlike most mountain ranges in the U.S. that run north to south. And that east-west run of the Uinta mountain range provides most any ecosystem you can imagine. High desert, one of the largest alpine forests in the U.S., and they transition down into beautiful fir and spruce forests before transitioning back into the arid, more desert-like conditions of the Uinta Valley. And peppered, of course, with those incredible red canyons and striking rock formations like we had seen over there in the Flaming Gorge. And throw in more rivers, streams, ponds, lakes, marshlands, meadows, and prairies than you can imagine, and you pretty much have Ashley National Forest. You also have a ton of history. I think I remember reading the first time we came through here that even the Spanish explorers didn't make it to this part of Utah until 1776, which means that while the U.S. was in the middle of a revolutionary war with Britain over on the East Coast, this part of Utah was being discovered and documented for the first time. Well, not exactly the first time. Ancient petroglyphs can be found throughout the forest, providing a glimpse into the area's prehistoric past and proving the presence of Native Americans here for centuries. And after those Spanish explorers, it really would be all about fur trappers and trading with the Native Americans for nearly 100 years, until the area got mixed up in that whole U.S. expansion thing. Around here, it would be the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War that would land Utah in the hands of the United States. And the first town settled in the region would be Vernal, and the Ashley National Forest would be established by 1915 by President Theodore Roosevelt. And it's pretty awesome that you can still walk amongst historic cabins, salt houses, and other structures that allow the imagination to run wild as you take in what life was like here in the high Uintas wilderness in a time when only Native Americans, trappers, and maybe some settlers walked these lands. And if you pay close attention while walking the forest, you can still find Spanish tree markings. These were markings left by Spanish explorers to indicate their routes and to claim territories along their travels. You'll also find remnants of the tools and equipment used by early loggers and dam builders. It's some pretty cool stuff. And one more click this evening? Well, that meant reading about tie hack tools and salt houses. It turns out that tie hacks were skilled laborers responsible for cutting timber into railroad ties during the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. And these tie hacks? Well, here, I found this from the folks at Wyoming PBS.
The tie hack industry was an industry that supported the railroads, and there were railroads all over the country. And wherever there was a railroad, there was a source of ties.
And it is so cool to learn about a profession that I never even knew existed, but played a critical role in the growth of a young country. I'd learned that the tie hacking industry would be the only source of railway ties until around 1920, when diesel-powered portable sawmill stations began showing up on site. But by 1920, over 254,000 miles of railway had been laid in the U.S. Asking the internet to do the math, if railway ties were set at 20 inches apart along each of those 254,000 miles, that meant that over 80 million railway ties had been created by hand. If I considered what the folks over on Wyoming PBS just told me, that the average tie hack would cut 25 to 35 ties in a day, how many tie hacks and how many man-hours went into the production of some 80 million railway ties? It's nearly mind-numbing, the sweat that went into this country. And that's just the railway system. So I had to ask, how many trees did that cost? 80 million railroad ties? Average of 3 to 4 ties per tree? That means like 22 million trees had to be cut down by hand. And the scraps from those trees probably warmed homes all over this place, while other pieces found their way to everything from the handles of tools and garden implements, and maybe even a chair or two. And while we were building a structure or two here and there, we hadn't even heard the term subdivision yet. So I had to ask the internet, how many trees have we cut down since the turn of the century in the United States? And it seems I found a question even the internet can't answer. But it's safe to say, a lot. I did read that between 2010 and 2020, the United States dropped over 2.5 million acres of natural forest land. And while a large portion of the deforestation during that 10-year period was due to logging and the timber industry, there were other factors. Clearing for development and urban growth, pest infestations, And, yeah, wildfires. And going back 120 years, we're down some 139 million acres of natural forest in the country. So there's quite a bit working against the 611 million acres of natural forests that we have left. And it made me curious, with population booming, urban sprawl running rampant, forest fires breaking records, what does the next 120 years hold for our natural forests? One very cool thing that I read, of the 611 million acres or so of natural forests left in the country, over 550 million of those acres are protected. National forests, wilderness areas, state parks. At least we can't get to those with a chainsaw. But pest infestations and wildfires? Another story, I guess. Man, and I hadn't even gotten to salt houses. But with the sun getting ready to set on our first night here, we'll have to get to all that and more later. We don't do walks after dark out here. You know, mountain lions, rattlesnakes, bears. We'll save the hiking, exploring, and outdoor wandering for the daylight hours. Just wrapped up dinner, popped my favorite movie in the DVD player, A Time to Kill. Some of John Grisham's best work, if you ask me. And we'll call it a night. See what tomorrow brings. And think about when we might head out of this Ashley National Forest. And where we'll go. And I wonder what we'll learn there.
Turns out, this thing called life comes with a lot of rules. Maybe it's time to break a few. Because you can. No, seriously. You can.